So without further ado, we will make a start in just a second. We are recording this evening. So if any of you would like to have the recording so that you can watch it back at a later stage, that's no problem. And the other thing to say is if any of you would rather not be on screen during that recording, please feel free to turn off your video. That's not a problem at all. So I think, Caroline, that's all we have.
And sorry, Jen, questions in the chat.
Of course, yes. If any of you have questions, if you put them in the chat box, and we'll get to those once we've heard from Laura, Ray and Edel. I hope with 48 participants that I might be able to invite you to sort of make your own question or sort of take part in the discussion. But we'll see how we get on and how time's going whenever we get there. So I think Caroline,
I would ask if you could stay on mute as well for the proceedings.
If you could all please mute yourselves, that will stop any feedback. So thank you all very much. Caroline, over to you for the video presentation.
Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to need a minute now to share my screen with the video. Thank you.
"20 years ago, I started photographing our oldest trees. They can be 4,000 years old. Some are dying from disease, insects, lack of rain, warming temperatures. Never did I realize that within my lifetime I would be recording their deaths.
It's really astonishing in a forest the extent to which the trees produce a canopy that is fairly uniform, fairly dense. They parcel out the space up there among themselves as though they had decided ahead of time, you get this space and I get this space. They don't really think of it that way, but that's the way it works out.
Trees are miraculous in other ways too. As they reach out with their leaves and branches, play a vital role in the health of the planet. Through photosynthesis, they help regulate Earth's temperature by pulling carbon dioxide, a powerful heat-trapping gas, from the atmosphere and emitting oxygen. Since carbon dioxide warms the atmosphere, by removing it and storing much of the carbon safely away in their branches, trunks, leaves, roots, and soils, forests help cool the Earth. In fact, every year, terrestrial ecosystems remove about 30% of fossil fuel emissions, and forests are responsible for most of that. But that percentage is decreasing as emissions increase, steadily raising Earth's temperature and threatening forests' ability to offset the warming.
We have warmed the Earth by a full degree and a little more. And forests are suffering increased hazards of fire as they get warm and dry, increased hazards of disease as they become vulnerable to insects, and dying as a result.
As trees die, they become part of a dangerous feedback loop kicked off by the warming. As the temperature rises, the climate becomes hotter and drier, and they fall prey to drought, fire, and insects. With fewer trees left, more heat-trapping gas remains in the atmosphere, raising the temperature higher, resulting in even more dieback. As trees burn and decay, the carbon they've locked away during their lifetime, what scientists call a carbon sink, is released back into the air.
It's entirely possible we reach a point where we're killing off forests much more rapidly than carbon can be fixed by forests. The net result then is to produce a feedback that's lethal.
Today, we have a choice. Allow trees to do their job and cool the planet, or jeopardize the forests we have. That's the path we're on right now. How we protect and manage forests will play a large role in determining our future. When it comes to global warming, 3 major forests matter the most: the tropical, the boreal, and the temperate. No forest is more critical for cooling the planet than the Amazon. Spanning more than 2 million square miles across 9 countries, this tropical forest has been storing carbon for millennia. Yet it is dangerously close to releasing more carbon than it absorbs. Mike Coe is the director of the Tropics Program at the Woods Hole Research Center. For over 20 years, he's studied how deforestation in the Amazon rainforest affects the local climate and environment.
Tropical rainforests probably account for about 15 to 20% of all the terrestrial carbon sink, and the Amazon's half of that. So we're talking about a significant fraction of our annual emissions are being taken up by the Amazon forest.
But in the last 50 years, nearly 20% of this forest has been lost, mostly to slash and burn land clearing, triggering fires, insects, and tree dieback. This not only releases the carbon stored there, it jeopardizes an important cooling function of the Amazon rainforest. During transpiration, roots pull water out of the ground and release it as water vapor through tiny holes in the tree's leaves, creating a cooling effect on the surrounding air. In the Amazon, transpiration can cool the region by as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
When we lose trees in the Amazon, when we cut them down, what we're doing is we're shutting off that transpiration. So what you get is a drier climate. And the more you deforest, the drier it gets.
Over the past 2 decades, the dry season has extended several weeks, stressing trees even more and creating an ideal environment for fires to spread.
During extreme droughts, a huge amount of the forest burns. That turns the forest that year from a net sink to a net source of carbon. And we can do the math. If that happens 5 times in a decade, this forest is now a source.
Today, tropical forests are absorbing 1/3 less carbon than they did in the 1990s. Scientists predict that with the loss of so many trees, the Amazon could flip to emitting more carbon than it stores as soon as the next decade.
You can imagine that the climate's changing a little bit and everything looks just fine. But then one day, it changes just enough that the whole system flips over. You know, it's the classic frog in the water that you heat up. The frog's not noticing anything until it's way too late.
The next major forest at risk of tipping from a carbon sink to a carbon source is the boreal, encircling the North Pole through Siberia and North America. The largest forested region in the world, this vast coniferous expanse, stores an estimated 2/3 of all forest carbon. Most of it locked away in frozen plant and animal remains deep in the ground. But that's changing. As with tropical forests, the warmer, drier climate here is making the trees more vulnerable to disease, insects, and fire. Brendan Rogers has been studying how boreal forests respond to climate change for the past decade.
Wildfires are getting worse across the boreal zone. We're seeing more and more large fire seasons, record-breaking fire seasons every year.
Unlike in tropical forests, the fires here strip off the insulating ground cover preventing it from building up in between the frequent burns. Without this protective layer, fires reach further and further down, burning the organic matter stored in the soil.
About 75 to 90% of all the carbon stored in these forests is underground. And that is actually the majority of the carbon that's getting released from these fires.
The fires kick off a feedback loop, triggered by warming in the boreal zone. More fires burn carbon deeper down in the soil, releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, heat-trapping gases that make the climate hotter and drier, leading to more wildfires. Like the Amazon, the boreal forest is going to switch from a carbon sink to a carbon source. Scientists don't know exactly when, but predict that at the current rate, it will happen by the end of this century, crossing a tipping point that the forest can no longer recover from.
We're seeing rapid change now, so rapid that the system is essentially not used to it. And the scary thing is not knowing where that tipping point is.
The temperate forest makes up only 1/4 of the world's forests, but it's our best hope, since the tropical and boreal forests are on the brink of becoming emitters of carbon. Once cleared for agriculture, many temperate forests in the US and Europe have made a comeback in recent decades. But in the southeastern US, old forests are being cut down by the wood pellet industry for burning, releasing decades of stored carbon back into the air. Even though these forests are being replanted, when it comes to offsetting global warming, old and young forests are not equal. Beverly Law has been measuring the exchange of both carbon dioxide and water between our forests and our atmosphere for the last 25 years. She works at 2 long-term testing sites that are part of a global network of more than 500.
An older forest has a lot of carbon stored compared to a younger forest. In a young forest ecosystem, there aren't that many trees there, and they're not taking up much carbon from the atmosphere.
Old-growth forests in the Pacific Northwest store huge amounts of carbon. Not only are they thriving in the wetter and cooler climate, these forests will be less vulnerable to climate change over the next 30 years compared to other forests in the western U.S.
If I were to try and mitigate climate change, the best strategy is when you have forests that have low vulnerability to climate change in the future, and they store a lot of carbon already, is keep those forests like they are, preserve them.
But unfortunately, these hardy carbon-rich trees have been prized by loggers for centuries. Redwoods that once towered over the Pacific coast are now mostly gone. When a tree is logged, 1/2 to 2/3 of the carbon it stores is released through decay or burning of the unused branches, leaves, and roots, as well as from the surrounding soil. Today, 17% of global carbon emissions each year can be attributed to logging and burning wood pellets for bioenergy.
In Oregon, of all the forest that was harvested over the past 100 years, 65% of that carbon has gone back to the atmosphere. Now, this is just the wrong time for that in terms of climate.
The warming atmosphere poses another kind of threat. Unable to survive the higher temperatures, many forest species are migrating north to cooler climates. But not all species can do this, and it takes time, which is in short supply. With the clock ticking, it comes down to how we manage temperate forests. Use them for commercial purposes, or keep them intact to cool the planet. While human activity has kicked off natural warming loops, human ingenuity could reverse their direction, turning them into cooling feedbacks instead. It would mean protecting and expanding forests, preserving marshes, grasslands, and all natural habitats. using agricultural practices that store carbon instead of releasing it, and letting trees and plants do their job of taking carbon out of the air. This would lower Earth's temperature and kick in a self-perpetuating cooling feedback loop. George Woodwell was an early pioneer, warning about fossil fuel use, setting off warming feedback loops 5 decades ago. He's convinced the solution lies with nature's own ability to cool the planet.
We can store carbon in life. If we want to be optimistic, we have to be very progressive in our transition away from fossil fuels and into a new green world. But it takes imagination, interest, and a recognition of the reality of an Earth that is failing at the moment. We can't allow it to be too late.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for working out the tech for us to be able to watch that together tonight. So I think I'm going to ask Laura and then Ray and then Edel, and that's just mostly because that's the order you're in on my screen, to give their reactions. As I say, anyone have any questions or comments to make, if you can put them into the chat box. And we'll take it from there. So Laura, if we could have your reactions, please.
Thanks, Jen. I think that's my 3rd time watching that, and it always upsets me. I find it hard to have a reaction apart from being upset and disappointed that we've got to this stage. Yeah. I think, like, I find them really hard, and even today earlier we were having a discussion about how do we go forward and how do we get people to engage, and in this particular discussion it was talking about art and how do we engage with art. And one of the people was talking about, well, we need to say how much sea levels are rising, and because we're a coastal county, we were just saying, okay, like there was one example of an art show that was done, and what they'd done is at nighttime they had LED lights on where the sea will rise to on this particular village. And again, I just find it so depressing, and I find it hard to relate to that, because I nearly shut down when I see that type of information. So like, it's good at the end there, he did talk about we need to be progressive in our transition to a new green world, which I think, like, obviously we do need to do that. To me, that's the type of message I would like to get out more, and about the opportunities that there are for that transition. So like, there's really exciting things happening. There's one thing called a decarbonizing zone, and I'm not sure some of the people on the call might have heard about it, but every local authority in Ireland has to choose a decarbonizing zone. So what that is one area, whether it's urban or rural, per local authority, that is going to meet 50% emissions reduction by 2030. So it's a massive, massive ask for a community to meet that. So the urban can be over 5,000 population, and rural is an area of a minimum of 4 square kilometers. So it's a big, big ask, but it's exciting. So say in Mayo, what we're doing is we're inviting community groups to apply to do this, and so that it'll be a journey for not just the zone that wins, but for everybody to do it. And like we're only at the very beginning of it, but when I talk to people about this, they're excited and there's enthusiasm, and I'm getting phone calls after going, oh, I was just thinking this and I was thinking this. So to me, if we do want to transition to a new green world, we really need to, as he said, to be progressive, but to be positive and to look at the positives and the things that we can do, and try to engage with as many people and with the community, the businesses, with everybody. We need to do it, but maybe in a fun, interactive way that'll allow everybody to participate. So sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you very much. I suppose the message that, you know, we've seen in that video is quite depressing, as you've put it, but you know, there is hope to be found as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ray. We'll move on to you then, please, and just to
Yeah.
get your reactions.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's lovely to see so many people join a really interesting event like this. Yeah, I mean, geez, I'd echo what Laura was saying. It's hard not to watch it and not feel a little bit down at what seems to be kind of in store for us. And you know, we saw examples from the boreal forests and from South America and from the temperate forests of North America, but we don't need to look that far, you know. I was just reading yesterday about the forests of Germany being under severe pressure. You know, the statistics like 85 and 90% of the oak, beech and spruce in those forests showing thinning crowns as a result of a number of years being affected by drought, which leaves the trees then more vulnerable to insect attack. And, you know, this is exactly the type of feedback loops that they're talking about. You know, that they're already here. And, you know, not so long ago in Ireland, we're losing forestry here. Now, for those, I see some people are tuned in from outside Ireland. We have a very interesting forestry model, if you like, where we've got 12% of the country is forested technically, but only 2% of that is native woodlands. All the rest is plantation forestry, and it's non-native. The majority is a species called Sitka spruce, which has a very shallow root, and it's often planted in monocultures, which leaves it uniquely vulnerable actually to drought, which we've been experiencing. It's funny, like, you know, we've just had a deluge for the whole winter, and we'd have had a few dry days in a row, and I'm kind of thinking, oh God, this is the start of this year's drought, you know. But that leaves our particular forestry setup, even though we are in a temperate zone, really vulnerable, you know. And there was a fire, I don't know, was it 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it might be more now, in the Cluish Valley in Galway, and in one fire we lost 1,000 hectares of forest. You know, like the average farm size in Ireland is 30 hectares, so that will give you an idea of the scale. In one fire we lost, and that was started, it's a whole other issue, but that was started by burning gorse for clearing uplands for God knows what other reasons related to agricultural subsidies. So yeah, look, if we are, you know, the video did suggest that temperate zones might offer a solution in terms of the forestry being less vulnerable in temperate zones to climate change. Well, if that is to be the case, then we need to make sure that we're actually creating or facilitating the right type of forestry in these temperate zones. And that's not monocultures. And it's probably not even, in a lot of ways, it's not even planted forests. You know, it's forests that are self-selecting. And what I'm talking about there is naturally regenerating forests. So you get trees that are adapted to the local area and adapted to the weather in that area, you know, and they're going to be the ones that are least vulnerable to climate change, rather than ones that we shove in the ground and say, you grow there, irrespective of that particular area's capacity to grow a tree, you know, especially when temperatures become extreme on either end. The last thing I'll say just in this bit is that, you know, it's not just our forests that are vulnerable to feedback loops. We've probably got a lot more carbon stored in our peat bogs here than our forests. And it's essential that the top layer of that peat stays wet for them to continue to store or sequester more carbon. And when that dries, you get oxidation of the peat, which releases more carbon. So, you know, there's other feedback loops at play there. I just finish on a positive, like, I think where there are all these environmental feedback loops in the physical world, I think there's the potential for really positive societal feedback loops. You know, I really do. I think there's a lot of interest out there. I think there's a lot of energy that's unharnessed in local communities. You know, the awareness has peaked really, and even more so during COVID. And I think if we can just facilitate that, communities need support, they need guidance, and that comes in the form of jobs. And you know, it's inspiring to see, you know, someone like Laura and the job she's in, but we need teams of Laura's in every local authority in the country, you know, like helping communities to, because this is a job that's too big for central government. The government can't do it. It's like invasive species. They're like, we need every community, every village, every landowner, all putting their shoulder to the wheel. And to do that, they need guidance and resources and support. And I think if we can achieve that, we can get some of these societal feedback loops, you know, and at least give ourselves a fighting chance.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ray. Thank you. We'll move on to Edel then. If you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm first of all, I have to apologize that I feel like I'm in a cave here, but the lighting here is terrible. Maybe that's a little bit environmentally friendly. I suppose, I mean, like Laura and like Ray, the film is shocking. It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating to see a film like this in 2021, when George and those like him in the film have been working for the last 5 decades on this. Like, we should have woken up much earlier than now. I think it's interesting, and for me, like when he says we can't allow it to be too late. I mean, we are almost allowing it to be too late now, you know. So you can be, I suppose the key, I'm shocked, I'm frustrated, I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised, and we can't be resigned, you know, because we have to try and do something about this. So I sort of would pick up on a lot of the things that Ray has been talking about, that this is actually has to come from the community, and all communities have to work together. But actually, communities have to see that climate action is good for them. So the community development has to come out of climate action. It can't be to the exclusion of community development. You know, I actually kind of see it as a people's transition. It needs to be that, rather than a climate transition in many ways. But just going back to the film, I mean, you know, the other, like when you think about trees, you know, there were lots of facts within the film, you know, like 30% of fossil fuel emissions is removed, and forest is hugely responsible for that. Like, if for every 10% of tree canopy, like the ozone depletion is reduced by 3 to 7%. Like, it makes absolute sense that we're planting trees. It actually makes more sense, as it says in the film, that we leave the forests that are there already, because I think that was a really good point within the film, that actually the best thing we can do is leave what's there. And for me, I suppose part of the opportunity, or what I found uplifting within the film, is the fact that, you know, temperate forests, and the area in temperate forest is within the temperate zone. There's a hope there, and because that's where we live in that zone. So we actually have a huge responsibility, you know, to ensure that there are more trees planted. And a bit like Ray, I wish that there wasn't just a team of Lauras. There actually needs to be, Laura needs to be at the same level as the director of services. Like, there's no point in having Laura off in an office, you know, as a climate change officer. There actually needs to be somebody who's at the same level as the CEO of the county council, because unless they actually put it you know, they put it into leadership, it really is, you know, there can be a million lovely paragraphs written about their commitment to climate change, but unless it's at a leadership level, I just think that it's not going to happen, you know, to the extent that it needs to, and as quickly as it needs to. And I suppose another reason why I'm kind of optimistic, and I'm just, with regard to the work that the Edible Landscape Project does, like it's inspiring people to plant more trees, and to make smarter food choices in particular. So to, you know, to improve our health, to improve our communities, and improve our planet. And it's actually great. It's a great project because it's really, really practical. You know, it's focused on planting trees around Westwood, planting the right trees in the right place at the right time. But again, it's small. It's unfortunately, it's, you know, got very little resources. And again, as Ray said, you know, we need to kind of lift the importance of this. Within Mayo, we can only do what we can do within our own area, you know, and we really need to lift the importance of this as an issue. And again, tree planting, I mean, there's a really low tree level, tree cover in Mayo. Like, we should be grasping this and saying, you know, we need to be planting the right trees in the right place at the right time, and just you know, taking this on, because we can reverse things. And I refuse to believe that humanity will allow this to get to the point where it's irreversible. But we have to act really quickly now. So sorry, have I gone on a bit of a rant there on this?
Thank you.
So Laura, I'm actually putting you forward for you know, to run the council. I think it's no good to be in an office at a, you know, on the 5th scale. You need to be up, very high up.
Thank you very much. Pardon me. We'll open it up then. Does anyone have? I see that there's one comment. Ben Ryan has put a comment in the chat box to just say Ireland offers few offsetting possibilities, although it sits on an estimated 1.5 tons of carbon, which is locked up in our peatlands.
Yeah.
You know, so again, it goes back to what Ray was saying about, you know, the peatlands and sort of preserving the peat bog. Laura, sorry, you want?
No, sorry, I was busy there because I wasn't allowed on mute, so I was just trying to tell you that.
That's fine, no problem. Does anybody else want to make a comment? Or Kathleen Freel is saying, I'm reminded of Alistair McIntosh's response to the question, where did we find hope? He put so much emphasis on community, its power and the power of possibilities. And I think that's a bit like of what Edel was saying just now about sort of community and the community focus in that.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just say, I see a comment there on the tree cutting, on the plant, on the hedge cutting and tree cutting. I just don't understand that, to be perfectly honest. Like, it's actually barbaric at the moment, what's going on around the county. Barbaric, there's no other word for it. It does not make sense. Like, you know, yes, I could understand some type of tree hedge cutting if there's a dangerous corner or that, but at the moment it's just ridiculous what's going on. I don't understand how a county council can have a development plan that has climate change on every second page and then goes out and rips the bejesus out of our hedgerows. I'm sorry. So thank you, whoever brought that up, Breed.
Yeah. And I'll respond to that because I knew I was going to be asked this question, so I've been trying to do research all week to go, okay, what is the response to this? And I guess the response isn't easy. So even today I was trying to, so a few of you might know that Peter Gill is our horticulture officer, parks and recreation officer, and he's brilliant. And every year he plants thousands of trees, and he's all about protecting the trees that we have. Or in some cases, so say for example, he was given a case of Ballina, there was, and traditionally, so even on the way into Westport, there's poplar planted, and poplar is a very unsuitable tree for the west of Ireland because it's got a very shallow root system. So I guess Ray kind of mentioned that earlier, but it's it can be wind thrown. So say in Ballina at the minute, there's all these petitions about not cutting down trees, but the trees are really, really dangerous. So when it comes to Peter, he really doesn't like cutting down trees, but this is an example of him having to cut down trees, but he will replant the trees. And so I met with him, and I just to talk about all of this, because I knew the trees would be an issue, and I didn't understand how maybe political trees were. And there's a few cases of where I've learned this. So I sat in on a roads SPC, and I was given a presentation. It was roads and transportation. I was given a presentation on climate action, and each local authority, so you know, you've been talking about expanding the teams, and this year, I feel like more so than any other year, the leadership is grasping climate action. So I'm getting regular calls from directors about engaging now. And even this Friday, every elected representative and every director and senior staff member is going to be getting climate awareness training. And it's mandatory that every person in the local authority by the end of the year should have received training on climate action. So it is changing, because we really, and most of you have probably seen the media in relation to the climate emergency in Mayo in January, and then in February they wanted to revoke it. So we really do need the education, and everybody needs to be engaged. But anyway, this roads and transportation SPC, so I hadn't spoken at this stage, but I think a good half an hour was spent talking about cutting down hedgerows. So there's an awful lot of education that needs to be done on that. So that was the elected representatives, and they're bringing forward what their whatever are saying. And then I was speaking to Peter Gill, our horticulturist, and he said he spent so much time trying to plant trees, and there's so many people against planting trees, and I never would have known that. I just assumed everybody was happy with trees, but he just said that there's so many people against planting trees. But that still doesn't answer your question of why all the trees have been cut down. So I was speaking to, because I know like even the road between Castlebar and Westport has just been brutalized over the last while. And so today again, I was talking to the roads office, and it became a bit clearer to me. So the it's always comes down to safety, and the rules are stricter and stricter. So now if a tree, I'll have it written down here, is over 17 centimeters in diameter, it's considered a risk, and it's advised that it's removed if it's within the clear zone. And the clear zone, depending on the speed of the road, if there's bends on the road, it can be anywhere between 6 and 15 meters from the road. So it's a massive area from the road. And then of course there's overhanging branches. Something I never thought about is shadowing. So if there's shadows, it creates ice on the road. So then they recommend cutting down the trees. There's certain types of leaves that if they fall a lot, that they're very waxy. So they are like oil on the road. So then again, it's advised that those trees are cut down. So there's a massive document on cutting down trees and what's allowed for safety reasons. And they're not, I couldn't find out if they have to be surveyed, but it didn't sound like they did. But so Peter Gill was talking about the Forestry Act. Okay, so traditionally there was a Forestry Act from the 1940s, and it didn't protect trees. So they drew up a new Forestry Act in 2014, and he said that protects trees even less. So it's very hard for him or for the local authorities to actually protect trees, because we don't have an act that protects trees. So just in relation to Mayo, Peter Gill, finally this year there is going to be a tree strategy drawn up, hopefully by the end of the year. So I know it doesn't answer your questions. I know it's not nice looking at the trees being cut down, but that's as much of as research as I could find out about why. But there are trees, like Peter was saying, that there are thousands of trees planted every year by Mayo County Council. But he also, like you were talking about, Ray, he is coming more to the understanding that planting trees is maybe not the best thing to do, because you have to import the soil, you have to import the trees. So even doing that, and then they might not survive. Whereas he was saying, on roads, just to let them regenerate themselves naturally, that he's actually transitioning more to that thought, that is the best thing to do. So there you go.
Okay, thank you, Laura and Edel. I have a couple of questions now. So Nikki Dowd has a question, and then Caroline Fitzgerald has a question, and then Peter Flynn has a question. So we'll take them in that order. So Nikki, if you're able, wherever you are, because I can't see you on my screen, if you're able to unmute yourself, please, and ask your question, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think you covered that, Lorna, to a certain extent, as that I've been privy to a few conversations where people want to plant the trees, but actually it's quite difficult to find a plot of land that is accepted and agreed upon in order for it to be done. And also, as you were saying, to find the right species to engage people in thinking that let's not just do a ton of spruces, let's actually really think about what's needed in the area or is happy growing in the area. But so then my first question was, how do you actually go about finding land that we could do it? And the second one is just maybe just an idea of getting a column in the Mayo News that would just be literally, did you know, a did you know column, and it could be just 3 or 4 facts every week. That's just a fun thing of trivia, but more towards climate change, giving some trivia stuff, but that actually goes into the, you know, the local community, and they can talk with the children about that, they can perhaps feel a bit smart about and ask, did you know, and, you know, start quoting it, but then maybe at the end of it saying what they can actually do to help, you know, because some people just don't even know that we breathe oxygen and trees give out carbon dioxide. You know, I'm not being funny. It's just even the simplest of things like that, that might help get people excited about, well, let's plant a tree and do our bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Edel, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, one of the projects that the Edible Landscape Project is involved with is called the Tree Towns Initiative, which is about planting trees, particularly in urban areas, you know, and again, it's about community engagement. It's about, you know, getting your hands dirty and joining, but again, it's about the right species. And so the emphasis is always on ensuring that we have sustainable species, but also species, edible species. And, you know, ideally, like already there've been a lot of trees planted around Westport, and I'm sorry just to concentrate on Westport because that's where it's located primarily. But again, you know, and part of it is a lack of funding. But the idea would be to have a tree tagging project, you know, so you can tag the trees. And actually, you know, in our heads, that could feed into Westport's tourism, because you could have an edible tourism trail, you know. So there are lots of really practical and yet enjoyable things that people can do. And along the way, the idea is that you then teach people more, you know, so it's plant a tree, but actually what is that about? What are you doing and why are you doing it? And where does that connect them with the bigger picture? You know, so the idea of the Edible Landscape Project is to start small, but actually to connect it back into the big picture. But again, you know, it's funding. Like, I mean, there's just a few people trying to do it. But I mean, on the WhatsApp in the summertime, there's hundreds of people who are out there doing their thing. But it would be great if it was recognized more and it was became something that was actually part of a county-wide structure rather than just a few lulas off digging a couple of holes, you know.
Well, yeah, because that, I mean, the people that are doing that and the people that are following it are people who are already interested.
Yes, no, and that's the thing.
You
need to broaden it out. Yeah. And understand. So sorry, I'm sorry to
no, fine at all.
How you doing?
Yeah, right. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Caroline, if you can unmute yourself then, please, and ask your question.
I think I'm on mute. Am I okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes, you can.
Okay. What I'm interested in is farmers and their role in planting trees. And I mean, some time ago we had projects suggested that farmers, I mean, designate part of the corners of their fields, like a triangle in corners, and you could cut that off and obviously plant sustainable trees and broad leaves. I'm not sure, Laura may have some information on how far farmers are in Mayo, especially where, you know, the vast proportion of our land is rural. And unless we get the farmers on board to plant, we're not getting very far. The other point or issue that if we do have forests, I mean, is there a plan for the plan of continuous cover forests in Mayo? I mean, maybe Laura to answer some of these questions. And also then, where has Peter Gill managed to plant the trees? Is it in any farmers' fields or is it in urban and down? Hopefully not by roads. All road trees are going to be chopped. That's obvious. Okay.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Laura, I think most of that was directed at you, so I'm going to let you take the lead on that question, and then we can move along if we have time.
Okay. I'll start with the easy one. So just in relation to where the trees are planted, a lot of them are planted in housing estates. So again, it's a community thing. So Peter would very much be of the opinion that you don't just do it as a solo run, that you bring the whole community with you. So I guess he's been doing it for 20 years now, and he knows that the ones that are a success is because the whole community engages. So he will do up plans for a community, but then the plan or the community have to engage and look for the funding. So the funding is available and it'll be easy enough to get the funding, but they need to take ownership of it, because if he just plants it, then there's no ownership, and it's likely there has been cases where the trees have just been cut down afterwards because they haven't been part of the process. So I guess Mayo County Council, we're not a farming organisation. We do have an agricultural strategy, and we're the only local authority to date that have an agricultural strategy, and a lot of the agricultural strategy was focused on forestry. Ray will probably know maybe a little bit more about that, but when it comes to farmers, they are trying to change these rules, and the cap reform should happen this year. But at the minute, it's really difficult for farmers to plant trees if they want to keep their payments, because you need all of your land and you get your payment according to the size of your plot of land. But it's your usable plot of land. So if you've got trees, it's not considered that it's usable for your sheep or for your cattle. So it's not done in a very fair way. You can get funding through GLOS and through the other schemes, but it's not a very holistic way of it happening. They are trying to change that. So there is a 1 hectare scheme being put out there. There is a woodland in public land scheme that's been announced as well. And again, it's not big forests, it's like even just starting at really small pockets of land. And I think that's important, just understanding that we don't have to plant a massive area, but that we can create all these kind of micro forests. So I'm going to see if Ray knows a little bit more about the farming side of it, if that's okay.
So like, I mean, for me, it's interesting. We were talking about hedgerows, and I think people are really only as incensed as they are about hedgerows because there's an acknowledgement that there's an issue with trees in the wider landscape. I think there's very practical reasons that hedgerows need to be managed the way they do. But I think people are like, it's a lightning rod for this anger at the wider problems with trees in the landscape. And when it comes to, like, for me, it's all about landowners. Like, of course, urban biodiversity and woodland projects are amazing and inspiring and engaging. But, you know, the majority of the land and the majority of the carbon needs to be sequestered out on farmland. That's where it needs to happen. And so they're the people we really need to get on board. And I mentioned earlier this idea of kind of positive feedback loops on a societal basis. That's what I'm talking about, is engage. Like, what is it that's motivating farmers at the moment? In a lot of ways, it's quite arbitrary. You know, it's very easy for me to imagine a scenario in 30 or 40 years' time where the cultural capital amongst farmers, as well as having, you know, bullocks with a good sheen on them, is the amount of carbon they've sequestered on their land, you know, and they trade this currency. So, but at the moment, the policies don't support them in that, right? Where we aim in Ireland to plant, we fail completely, but we aim to plant 8,000 hectares of forestry a year, right? Of that, the target for native woodlands, or the native woodland scheme, is 300 out of 8,000, right? So that's, as a start, crazy. The second thing is the rates which are paid. Actually, native woodland is paid at a higher rate to farmers than spruce plantations are. It's about 670 a hectare versus about 515 a hectare for spruce. But in real terms, spruce matures after 30 to 40 years. So there's a pension there for the farmer. There's a windfall, there's a tax-free windfall. Oak and other native species, you're planting them for the next generation. So that we need a commensurate grant that acknowledges that you can't, you know, I know foresters who say they can't in good conscience recommend a native woodland scheme to landowners because, as one described it to me, it's a shackling to penury. You know, you're telling this person, well, that plot of land, you know, that your forefathers looked after and kept drained and all this, that's going to devalue radically, and it's not going to earn you any money after the 15 years of grant run out. So that's one of the issues. The other is the bureaucracy involved in forestry at the moment is crazy. And I mean, look, we don't have enough time to deal with that tonight, why it came about or whatever, but a lot of it's understandable. It's come about because we failed to protect some of our most important habitats, especially bogs and stuff. Going forward, we need to ensure we're protecting the bogs and other sensitive habitats like rare grassland habitats, but we also need to make forestry an easy option, and the right kind of forestry an easy option for landowners. So that's it. Yeah, that's kind of all I'd have to say. For me, all the answers are with landowners, and they really look, you know, I know farmers are actually feel put upon. There's all these different things that they're expected to do and very little support out there. I think that's one of the key things. It's not good enough to say, oh, we're supporting the farmer, they can show up to a meeting. They need people to come along to their farmyards in a non-confrontational way and help them, as people mentioned earlier, find those pockets, find those groves, find those areas of land that actually might be beneficial for them in multiple different ways to put in some native trees.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ray. I'm just conscious of the time, but I want to sort of, you know, we've some questions or some comments in the chat box that I just want to bring to people's attention. So Vincent English says, does the peatlands, or do the peatlands store more carbon than woodland? And if so, what's the ratio? I'm not sure if anyone might know the answer to that.
I don't have the Irish statistics, Jennifer, but I know at a global level, the peat covers about 30% of the Earth's surface. Forests cover about 33%, and peatland actually stores double the total amount stored in forests. So it's an incredibly dense reserve of carbon. If you think about it, I mean, peat is created, as you know, by sphagnum moss, and like some of the lakes in the centre of Ireland we've harvested a lot of peat, they can be 12 to 15 meters deep of pure peat, and all that is just and what we're looking at the moment is a lot of the surfaces of these bogs are open and they're drained and they're leaking carbon. I mean, forests are key, but in an Irish context, our bogs are just as important, if not more, in terms of kind of getting ahead in the battle against kind of losing carbon.
Yes, okay, thank you. Pat Neary comments, rules around land planting must change. Once planted, it must remain as forestry, i.e. once felled, it must be replanted. Landowners are not inclined to plant due to this. I am not sure of the truth or otherwise of that comment.
It's definitely a barrier to planting, but at a practical level, I have sympathy for the government on this issue. In how do you pay more? The afforestation budget is relatively significant. You pay out money to create forest. You can't have a situation in 30, 40 years time that land reverts into farmland that's then again in some instances leaking carbon again. So it's a very tricky one to deal with. I think really the way to get ahead of it is to kind of incorporate forestry onto farms in a way that farmers see it to be obviously beneficial to their farming systems rather than something that they feel just obligated to do, you know. And I think there are ways of doing that, such as agroforestry, you know, or ways maybe meeting minimum biodiversity standards or as nutrient interceptors to protect water courses. There are definitely ways of doing that, farmers that can see trees to actually be advantageous.
That's great, thank you. So we have Peter Flynn. If you can unmute yourself, Peter had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Yeah, my video isn't working. That's probably a good thing. Just I suppose to pick up on a couple of comments there. Like as a county councillor in Mayo, I can tell you if you speak to any of the other 29 of them, the single biggest representation other than potholes are trees and hedges. And it's generally not from farmers. It's generally from car owners who give out about their cars being scraped and damaged and whatnot. And it's also ironically from cyclists quite a bit, who are probably cycling for the right reasons, but then they're saying, hold on a second, these trees or hedges are getting in our way. So like, to be fair to the farmers, I think they get a bad rap at times, but you know, we have to listen to the people that are complaining most about what's happening to them. So we have to deal with that particular issue. I think part of the problem is that in a lot of cases, the wrong type of trees or hedging has been grown in so many different locations, in the rural areas and in the towns and so on. And I really do think that needs to be part of the education program for everybody, including the councils themselves, in trying to remedy that part of it. This year, ironically, and I don't know what happened, but the Road Transportation Ireland, Infrastructure Ireland, TII as they're known, they're responsible for a very small fraction of the roads in Mayo, but the Castlebar Westport Road, the Westport to Leenan Road are two prime examples where there's been butchery. That's been driven by our national transportation organisation. So it's not actually, not that I'm trying to get Mayo County Council off the hook, but in fairness, we're not actually responsible for that piece of it. But like if you take Mayo as an example, we've nearly 6,500 kilometres of road to look after. So you can imagine the amount of representations we get back in relation to overhanging trees and hedges and so on. So I'd say I'm not defending the council, but at the same time, I just want to give another perspective on it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for doing that. Dave Whelan has joined us. He, along with Edel, is from Edible Landscapes. Dave, have you any comments to make? As I realise I'm sort of putting you on the spot as you weren't here right at the beginning, but having listened to some of the discussion.
Thanks very much for inviting me along. Actually, Peter Flynn is involved with the Edible Landscape Project as well as Katrina McCarthy. I suppose specifically as around forestry and those type of questions, Katrina McCarthy is probably the best one to answer that. But at a more general level, I think this is a lot about communication and how you communicate across the generations from young people up to you know, different ages, etc. And what has been missing in the past is kind of clear communication. I think it's sort of been a top-down communication where you know, you're nearly told what to do and you're supposed to obey certain rules, etc. But I think clear communication is a key part of this, and also education. Edel mentioned some of the projects that the Edible Landscape Project have been involved in, specifically around planting on the railway walk and the greenway, etc. A lot of that hasn't been highlighted and kind of publicized. Great work has been done, but it really hasn't kind of been evangelized, so to speak. We probably need to do a better job of that from the ELP's perspective. But I think what we have done is we have got involved with all the different generations within the community, and I think that's key to this. You need to be educating across the generations really to get any sort of traction, and it's a community thing. You know, none of this gets done really at an individual level. It's about bringing the community together, and I suppose this is what you're doing tonight, the congregation, bringing the community together and having these type of conversations and identifying where we're falling down, I suppose, as regards kind of communication, where we're not educating people. And it's about community and about bringing people along. I think Laura spoke a little bit about that. Ray might have mentioned it there too. You've got to bring people along on this journey, and you can't be really talking down to them. I think that has been done in the past. So the message and the communication needs to change. People need to be a little more educated around what's going on with climate change. And I think, you know, if you solve part of that and the solutions around communities, it's around being local solutions as well. I think you can take small steps towards kind of the big change. That's really it from me. Katrina, if Katrina's on the call, she could probably answer some questions maybe around more specifics on the projects that the Edible Landscape Project have undertaken. Somebody mentioned there earlier on sites around Westport. It might have been Laura or somebody else. We identified about 20 sites, I think, around Westport that could be planted. We did put a proposal into the council to plant on those sites, and they're publicly available sites. Unfortunately, COVID came into the equation before we could really get it off the ground. But that was going to form part of what we called our Tree Towns initiative, starting here in Westport, building tree towns here in Westport and really evangelizing that, and then moving that out across communities across Mayo, with the ultimate intention of actually rolling it out nationally. And so hopefully once they lift lockdowns or the phases of lockdowns, we can get back to that good work. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Dave. I am very aware of time, and I said this wouldn't go on much past 8 o'clock. So Laura, Ray and Edel, if I can give you 30 seconds to a minute each to sort of sum up from your own perspective, because you're coming from different perspectives, that would be great. So again, I'm going to work my way across my screen. So Laura, that's back to you, please.
Okay, so I guess I'm just going to say lots of things that are happening that are exciting that we can all get engaged in. So just Green Restoration Ireland, Mayo has the largest amount of blanket bogs. So we mentioned bogs out of any county in Ireland. Green Restoration is looking at re-wetting bogs across the country, but some of them are in Mayo. That's exciting. The Living Bogs is another similar project, but it's with raised bogs, so it doesn't really apply so much to Mayo. As Nikki was talking about the fun facts, we're trying to send out a tip on Tuesday through the Mayo County Council page and Good News Friday, but it's just really, because these little tips, they actually take a little bit of time to put together. So now I'm like, oh God, tomorrow's Tuesday, so I have to think of something to put out tomorrow. The public land that David's been talking about, there is now a scheme that the government have announced for planting woodland on public land. So I'd say Dave will touch base with you on that after this. And the other big thing I really do want to say is this decarbonising zones. So any community group across Mayo would really like for you to engage with it, because one zone will be chosen, but I think it's an opportunity for all communities across Mayo to work together and learn from each other. And I don't know if you've been watching the Mayo PPN Goes Green, but there's been brilliant videos launched the last 7 days, and the last one will be on Paddy's Day. Just talking about what community groups in Mayo have been doing in relation to climate action, and they've been really brilliant. And I didn't even know all the stuff that's happening, so they've been really inspiring what is happening. So I think we just need to engage more with each other, communicate more with each other, and yeah, get moving and acting, I guess.
That's great. Thank you, Ray. Your minute starts now.
Jennifer, I see I have capacity to share screen. Do you mind if I throw a picture up?
No, that's okay.
1 sec there now.
Our tech team can work out that you can do that.
Host disabled participating screen sharing. That's a shame. If I could be enabled, that'd be great. But anyway, look, if I can't, that's fine.
No, you're co-host now.
Yeah, you're the co-host.
Oh, great. 1 sec. Here we go again.
Just to clarify, I asked everyone beforehand to have the content to share.
Sorry, here we go. So can you all see this?
Just about, give it a second now. It's loading. I can see it.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the lines in the film that I just wrote down was imagination and interest, right? And I think that's what it's all about. It's about communication. It's about bringing people along, and it's about inspiring people, not scaring people. It's about showing people that there's something to fight for and something worth it out there. This is something that's only a habitat that only exists in 7 or 8 parts of the world. It's a temperate rainforest, and we have them here in the west of Ireland, right? You have them in Mayo. We have them in Clare, they're in Kerry, they're in Donegal, right? They're places that get really high rainfall and moderated temperatures due to the impact of the Atlantic. And for me, this is how we inspire people. We say, we've got like some of the most unique forest ecosystems in the world. Go and find them. And not just go and find them, find ways of recreating them, of re-establishing them. And up in Mayo, you're so well positioned to take advantage of all the rainfall and all your high mountains and the crevices and the cracks in the mountains. So for me, that's what it's about. It's about communication and inspiring people and getting people interested.
Thank you very much, Ray. Edel, you have your last and then we bring it to a close.
I would be with Ray. I think it is about inspiring people. And one of the simplest things we can all do, I suppose, to improve our communities and our environment is to plant a tree. Do you know, like it is a simple thing to do, but as again, it has to be the right trees. And I think it's a point that Peter made that, you know, there's no point in putting in trees that are not native to here, do you know. But I do come back to, again, to some of the points that Ray made. Do you know, there's no point in asking, you know, farmers and landowners to plant forests if there's no benefit to them, do you know. And for me, I mean, actually TASC, the Think Tank for Action and Social Change, did a really good report, and it was called The People's Transition. And the thinking on that report, and this is where I would come at it, is that people actually care more about community development and community wealth than they do climate action at the moment. Yeah, so we have to link the two. So we have to ensure that people know that actually climate action is not a bad thing, and that actually communities can develop, whether those communities are farmers or whether they're people who live in an urban housing estate. That we all have to know that actually in taking these actions, that there's actually a benefit to everybody. And I mean, never mind the planet, that actually we as a collection of communities can actually live in a better way than we are now. So that's where that would be my sort of finishing point on this all.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you especially to Laura, to Ray, and to Edel, and to Dave for joining us this evening and giving your unique perspectives on forestry and the way that we can work together with our communities to encourage our native species. So thank you very much for that. Thank you all for coming this evening. I hope that you found that as interesting and as educational as I have. I'm reliably informed by our tech team that Mayo PPN goes green. Those short videos are on the Westport Eco-Congregation social media, so you'll find us on Facebook and Twitter, I think. And go safely, folk. And thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much now.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Well done.
everyone.
Everybody.
Well done to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Good to see you, Laura. See you, Breed.
We'll catch
Bye-bye.
up.
Nice to meet you, Jennifer. So.
Yes, you too.